Okay, the next item of business is a debate on motion 20731 in the name of Jackie Bailey on the safety of the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital. I'd invite members wishing to participate to press the request to speak buttons now or as soon as possible. And I call on Anna Sarwar to speak to and move the motion up to 7 minutes. Mrs Sarwar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I want to begin by paying tribute to the late Jean Freeman. My thoughts and those of all of the Scottish Labour Party are with Jean's partner Susan, her friends and family and her former colleagues. Jean and I had many political disagreements, but I have to pay tribute to Jean Freeman because the progress that families, doctors and I have been able to make on the Queen Elizabeth Hospital was possible because Jean Freeman was willing to listen, willing to reflect, and she was willing to act. And I want to put on record my thanks to Jean for her commitment to Scotland and her commitment to public service. Presiding Officer, I also firmly believe that if Jean Freeman was still the Health Secretary, we would not be having this debate today. Absolutely. Presiding Officer, I move the motion in my name, and let me start by saying unequivocally, I will always put patient safety before politics. And I wish that was the case with this SNP government. If it was, then we wouldn't have had the devastating consequences we've seen at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital. We need transparency and answers now so we can rebuild public confidence and so we can ensure patient safety. It is now clear, after more than 2 weeks of questioning of the Health Secretary and the First Minister, that the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, every unit and every ward, has not been validated. That is serious. That is not an acceptable place for the country to be and for the government to be. And it does nothing to reassure, after everything that has played out over the last 10 years of this Queen Elizabeth University Hospital scandal. Many questions about what happened and why remain unanswered, whilst families still have to fight for justice and truth, and whistleblowers are still to be recognised for their heroic role. So I want to recognise again the bravery and determination of Dr Penelope Redding, Dr Teresa Inkster and Dr Christine Peters. For nearly 10 years, these women have been bullied and dismissed by the very organisation they serve. And if they had been listened to, we would not be facing this situation now. And I want to restate to this Parliament again, if these doctors are not satisfied, I am not satisfied, and not a single MSP in this Parliament should be satisfied. Much of the wider issues will come in the public inquiry, but this debate is about the here and now. Last week, Neil Gray announced another oversight board, this time to look at infection control issues. Whilst this is welcome in principle, it can't be a repeat of previous oversight boards that were used as political cover to protect the interests of those in power. It must do the urgent hard work, it must correct mistakes, and it must make sure patient safety is the only priority. So the government now needs to be very clear on these questions. What is the timetable for the verification and the validation of the hospital, every ward and every unit? When are they going to publish any current reports and any upcoming reports so the public can have confidence? Will they give a cast-iron guarantee to include and to be led by the doctors who have been proven to be right in everything they have said for the last 10 years? And will they guarantee that those that are proven to be wrong in the last 10 years won't be the ones that are relied upon to give the right answers this time? Finally, I will.
Thank you.
Declaration of interest as a practising HSGP. This is a very serious matter. Children have died, and it's vital we hear from everyone what happened in exactly the way that Anna Sarwar has just said. Though several Scottish Labour councillors and SNP councillors were on the board during this period. One is Patricia Ferguson, who is now chair of the Scottish Affairs Committee, and another is Martin McCluskey, who is the UK Government Minister. Now, we call for Nicola Sturgeon to give a personal statement to MSPs, which the member and his party supported. So for the same reasons, would Anna Sarwar back my calls for Patricia Ferguson and Martin McCluskey to make a personal statement in the House of Commons?
Anna Sarwar, can you give the time back?
I thank Mr Gulhani for that question. I think it's really important that members of the board, in terms of who had responsibility in terms of appointments, should be told about why information was withheld from that board by board executives, board managers and by government. And they need to answer those questions. Finally, on the questions that need to be answered, will they guarantee that there will be genuine independent oversight of this validation and verification process? In order to rebuild public confidence and ensure public safety, they must publish all this documentation, everything they have right now and everything that follows. Anything less than that full commitment on these questions isn't good enough. And any equivocation on these questions only demonstrates that this government has not learned the lessons of the past and is actually just repeating the same mistakes. But let me go further and make a firm commitment today. If this government does not take the appropriate action, I will. I am very clear that I will ensure that we have an open process and ensure we verify and validate the hospital. And I will have a transparent and public process. If that means remedial work has to be done, I will pull out all the stops to make sure that remedial work happens so patients can be safe and have confidence. And I will not compromise patient safety. So if I have to temporarily close individual wards or units, I will. Because patient safety before politics, always. Now, I want to say clearly that amazing things happen by amazing staff in the hospital at this every single day. And I also accept there is always a risk of adverse incidents in the NHS. That is the nature of healthcare. But what we have to stop is the deliberate misjudgments and a rotten culture of secrecy and cover-up that adds risk to patient safety, especially adding higher risk to immunocompromised patients. The government needs to put patient safety, truth and transparency at the forefront, and they must stop hiding behind a public inquiry when it comes to the operational decisions and patient safety today. This was Scotland's super hospital, a crown jewel in the SNP government's record. That record is now stained with scandal, shame and flat-out corruption. People have died, families have been betrayed, staff have been bullied. So serious that deaths linked to avoidable infections at this hospital are being investigated by the Crown Office. Yet no minister and no official has ever taken responsibility or accountability. Quite the opposite. People have been rewarded. This cannot happen again. It's time to put patients before politics and to make sure those in need in our hospitals are kept safe. So let me end by repeating my commitment to the families and staff. I will not be silenced. I will not rest, and I will not stop until they get the truth and the justice they deserve.
Thank you, Mr Selwyn. I now call on Neil Gray to speak to Amendment 2731.2 up to 5 minutes, please.
Presiding Officer, I move the amendment in my name, and I want to begin again by sharing my heartfelt condolences to all of the families impacted by the issues in front of the Scottish Hospitals Inquiry. Patients and families deserve answers, and I believe that through Lord Brodie's inquiry that is what they will get. Presiding Officer, like Mr Sarwar today, I am also reminded of the fact that it was our then Cabinet Secretary for Health, Jean Freeman, who took those important steps to get to where we are today. It was Jean who first took forward the concerns of families and whistleblowers, first instigating the independent review and thereafter the Scottish Hospitals Inquiry in 2019. It was also Jean, in her time as Cabinet Secretary, who took the initial steps to ensure that a future body be set up to assure the safety and risk management of NHS sites. Indeed, that is why the body NHS Assure was established in 2021 for this very purpose, a fact which the Government's motion mentions today. Presiding Officer, this is the first time I've had the opportunity to place on record in Parliament my sincere sadness that we have lost Jean Freeman this past weekend. Jean was a force of nature in the best possible way. She was incredibly intelligent, loyal and generous with her time, her support and her kindness. She was a force for good, and she encouraged all of us to be better. I know this Parliament will have the opportunity to properly remember Jean, but I also know how much this subject today was what propelled her to put into force the changes we now have that have strengthened the safety of our hospitals. It is right that I take this opportunity to recognise her leadership, and my thoughts today are very much with her beloved Susan, their families and friends, and all the many, many people who love Jean. Jean was driven in all that she did by a sense of justice and fighting for a fairer Scotland. She wanted to get to the truth for patients, for whistleblowers and families, as she recognised they had been let down. She said this herself in September of last year. That is again why I bring today's debate back to the people at the heart of this inquiry. It was for them that the inquiry was established, to interrogate decisions taken and decision-making processes, to identify responsibility wherever it lies and to shine a light where answers were lacking, to get the justice they deserve. I cannot begin to imagine the pain, the hurt felt by all of those who have lost a loved one, but who have so bravely and candidly participated in the Scottish Hospitals inquiry. It's absolutely vital that Lord Brodie, as chair of the inquiry, can be given the necessary space and time to come to his own conclusions for families without political interference. I again reiterate this important point to colleagues. I also reiterate that the Government will not comment on the live police inquiry, nor seek to speculate on Lord Brodie's conclusions, regardless of the appetite for colleagues for me to do so. Turning to the substance of Labour's motion, let me begin by echoing the motion's recognition of safe and expert care carried out at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital. I place on record my heartfelt thanks to all the staff, no matter their role. All contribute to that excellent service. I'd also like to recognise the fact that the new leadership of NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde has committed to rebuilding trust and public confidence. The new Safety and Public Confidence Oversight Group that I announced last week will be vital in this respect, and I'm delighted that the group will be co-chaired by Sir Lewis Ritchie. I met with Sir Lewis yesterday, and I'm assured that he will provide robust and independent scrutiny of these issues. That is why I cannot support the Tories' motion, which seeks to ignore the very fact that this group will have important independent and external oversight. The group will, as highlighted in the Government's amendment, also look at the wider issues of built environment and validation that are of interest to Labour's motion. It is right that I allow that group to undertake this work free from ministerial interference. Indeed, if I was seeking to direct the findings of this group, then I'm sure that some of the very same members here today, speaking of accountability and transparency, would have choice words for me.
I'll give you the time back.
If I take my time
Briefly,
back.
Brian Whittle.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you giving me, Cabinet Secretary. Given all of that, in the end of the day, when these tragedies occur, who ultimately will be held responsible and accountable for the findings?
The Government will be responsible for the implementation of those recommendations that are made by the Public Inquiry, that are the responsibility of Government, and we will also ensure that NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde, for those recommendations that are made of it, are held accountable to ensure their speedy implementation. So I will not seek to preempt the issues that this group will be reviewing. I welcome its intention to include whistleblowers, patient representatives and the public in its work, and the group will draw on the expertise of national agencies such as NHS Assure, NHS Health Improvement Scotland and industry experts to continue to demonstrate that the Queen Elizabeth provides a safe environment for patients and staff. However, I do agree that it is vital, given the significant political and public interest, that Parliament also be kept updated on the group's work. That's what my amendment seeks to ensure. So let me now turn to the important issues of water safety, ventilation and infection control highlighted in Labour's motion. Ministers have already placed on record our confidence in the safety of the Queen Elizabeth, but let me set out again why this is the case. Firstly, I have absolute confidence in the leadership of the Board and the Chief Executive of NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde in their ability to ensure the cultural change needed in Glasgow. This is vital in ensuring whistleblowers are protected and supported to speak up, and I reiterated the Government's commitment to a safe whistleblowing culture when I met with Scotland's new National Independent Whistleblowing Officer last week. Secondly, the inquiry heard from the independent expert Andrew Poplett that the water system management is now extremely well managed, with significant improvements made. Over 30,000, I'm really sorry, I'm already toiling for time. Over 30,000 water samples were taken and analysed over 2025, and monthly air quality testing is similarly undertaken in necessary areas. Mr Poplett noted that the facilities team is exceeding standard guidance, adopting a proactive and preventative approach that prioritises patient safety and resilience. Furthermore, I can confirm that the Board has commissioned and received 2 independent reports on their water and ventilation systems to provide further assurances. These will be considered by the Safety and Public Confidence Oversight Group, in addition to proactive planned maintenance of the hospital systems, which is carried out routinely, and in addition to reactive reporting and escalation, which is carried out as and when required to ensure clinical safety of the hospital. The findings of the independent reports on the water and ventilation systems have been positive, with a fully compliant ventilation assessment in December 2025 and a fully compliant water safety system in January of this year. Presiding Officer, there is more detail that I will seek to put on the record in my concluding remarks, but as I said at the outset of my speech, we must ensure that the patients, families and staff at the heart of these issues that we are discussing get the truth that they deserve through Lord Brodie's inquiry, and for these reasons I ask members to support the Government's amendment.
Thank you. What limited time we had available has now been exhausted, and therefore members will now need to stick to their speaking time allocation. With that, I call Sanders Gulhani to speak to and move Amendment 20731.2. Up to 4 minutes, Dr Gulhani.
Thank you. I'd like to start by apologising to Chamber to say that I need to leave promptly when the debate was due to finish at 4. I would also like to associate myself with the remarks about Jean Freeman from both Anna Sarwar and Neil Gray. As Scottish Conservatives, we support much in this motion and seek to strengthen it with our amendments. The motion rightly recognises the exceptional NHS staff at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital who deliver outstanding care in the most difficult of circumstances. Those who held office during these scandalous years must be held to account. This is about trust. Trust shattered by over a decade of SNP mismanagement, evasion and political spin. Children died, families were lied to and gaslit, whistleblowers were threatened and silenced. The hospital was rushed open in 2015 before it was ready, not because it was safe, but because it suited the SNP's PR agenda. Politics over patients. And when the truth began to emerge, the response wasn't honesty, it was bureaucracy, legal threats and institutional spin. A disgraceful campaign of silence from a health board and a government more interested in optics than accountability. And what did Nicola Sturgeon's Chief Nursing Officer, Fiona McQueen, reportedly suggest? That they offer them £50,000, which is a trip to Disneyland. Sophia Smith's brave mother said, "I told her we didn't want your holidays or your money, we want justice." Mrs McQueen is still on the public payroll, earning over £90,000 a year as chair of the Scottish Police Authority, an organisation that aims to increase public trust in policing through accountable, proportionate and transparent oversight and scrutiny. The irony. So I ask again, why are Scottish taxpayers still funding someone who allegedly showed such appalling judgment? Accountability must begin today. I've written to the Cabinet Secretary for Justice and I've also written to the Justice Committee, and I think it is of paramount importance that she appears in front of the committee to explain her alleged heartless and shameless bribe to grieving families. But the issue goes far beyond one individual. We cannot accept that NHS GGC are running and co-chairing the oversight body. This is the same health board that presided over the failings and caused the scandal. Millie Main's mum said she was let down and lied to. Victims have no confidence in its leadership. You couldn't make it up. It's like asking a fox to guard the henhouse. The public deserve real oversight, not more of the same. And let me say this clearly. Whistleblowers show extraordinary courage, but they have lived in fear for their livelihoods. I've spoken to them. They deserve our thanks and our protection, not punishment. Whistleblowers are telling me today that cancer patients are being told not to drink the tap water or even brush their teeth with it. So I say to the Cabinet Secretary, go to the Queen Elizabeth and drink a litre of the tap water on camera. If it's safe enough for patients, it should be safe enough for ministers. We condemn the former Health Secretary, Shona Robison, for breaking her pledge to Parliament to carry out an independent safety audit before the hospital opened. That broken promise may have cost lives. The scandal has devastated families and damaged public trust in the NHS. Let this be the turning point. Put patients over PR, put truth over spin, put accountability over political preservation. And I move the Scottish Conservative amendment in my name.
Thank you, Dr Gulhani. I now call Gillian Mackay. Up to 4 minutes, Ms Mackay.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. And could I follow others in acknowledging the sudden passing of Jean Freeman and offer our condolences to Susan, the wider family and SNP colleagues who I know are keenly feeling her loss. I'd like to open once again by paying tribute to the patients, families and staff who have campaigned for years, often at great personal cost, to bring the issues at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital to light. We would not be having this debate without them, and I wholeheartedly pledge my party's support to getting the truth for families, and will do everything we can to hold those responsible to account. To lose a loved one in the place they're meant to be safe is unimaginable. To then be lied to about what happened to them is disgraceful. Patients and families have been betrayed and staff have been silenced, and that must never happen again. I welcome this debate as I think it's important that we continue to scrutinise the Government's response to the issues at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, and it's an important function of this Parliament. We will be supporting the Labour motion because, while we've been reassured the hospital is safe, it's an ongoing concern that the Cabinet Secretary hasn't been able to assure us of a full validation at the hospital. We talk about restoring patient trust, and this is a necessary and vital step towards achieving that, and people deserve to know what's happening. However, I do have some concerns about how we move forward, get answers for patients and, crucially, rebuild confidence in the services that are essential for so many. We should question government and apply pressure where it's needed without causing additional alarm. And the last thing we want to do is put people off from attending potentially life-saving treatment. Jackie Baillie acknowledges in the motion that thousands of patients are treated safely and expertly by NHS staff in the hospital every year, and that's hugely important. But some of the rest of the motion could cause further anxiety and fear. I say this gently and not to undermine the important issues that the motion raises, but to highlight that there are two important tasks at the heart of this: getting answers for families and rebuilding that trust. The motion references patients that are at risk, which in my view potentially undermines the work that has been done to reassure patients and staff. In the last debate we held on this topic, my amendment, which parties voted for, acknowledged that recent revelations surrounding the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital will have been distressing for patients, their families and staff, and that this could create uncertainty and fear regarding the safety of Scotland's hospitals and negatively impact staff morale. We will always seek to hold the Government to account and get those answers. And like everyone in this chamber, I'm on the side of patients, families and staff, and I want to see them get the truth because they deserve it. I'm voting for the motion today because I, like others, want as much scrutiny as possible, but I do think we need to reflect on how we can do this without creating more anxiety than is already there. Ultimately, however, it's the Scottish Government's responsibility to reassure people. The Government and the Health Board must be fully transparent, and that means cooperating fully with the inquiry, but also publishing any additional documents and communications requested whenever that request is reasonable. Government have a tough hill to climb before they've earned back the trust of patients, families and staff. I do welcome the establishment of the Safety and Public Confidence Oversight Group, as I believe this will play an important role in rebuilding relationships. I previously asked the Cabinet Secretary if there would be patient and staff representatives on the group, and I'd be grateful if he could clarify this in his closing. To conclude, Presiding Officer, it's vital that we rebuild trust and confidence in Scotland's hospitals. This must be led by the Cabinet Secretary and the Scottish Government, but as MSPs, we also have an important role to play. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Mackay. And I call Jamie Green again. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you. Like others, can I start with sharing the sadness and condolence of the Liberal Democrats at the death of Jean Freeman. I think those of us that lived through those COVID years in this chamber will remember they were dark and difficult, but no one ever doubted Jean's commitment to making Scotland as safe as it could be during those times, and we share our warmest thoughts with her family, her partner and her colleagues in the chamber today. But really, Presiding Officer, the crux of this whole debate is the issue of trust. Do the public trust our institutions to properly investigate what went so badly wrong at Queen Elizabeth Hospital? Do the public trust any of us here today to unearth what went wrong, or who knew what, without the usual political point scoring that normally comes with health debates? Do people out there trust that the hospitals that they attend to get better or to look after their loved ones ultimately are safe? And do the public trust that the NHS boards, the government and those at the very top will hold their hands up and take responsibility so that none of this ever happens again? Now, these questions are important because those who lost loved ones were forced to campaign for answers, for the truth and for accountability. They never had the chance to grieve properly. And many of us in this chamber, myself included, will have had loved ones in that hospital. And we trusted that hospital that it would look after them, that it would care for them, that it would help them get better. And for some families, your loved ones didn't come out. That trust has been shattered by this scandal. And scandal is the only word I can find fitting to describe what's happened. Now, of course, we often come here and criticise the government on capital projects. But this isn't a delayed over budget ferry. This isn't a delayed over budget prison. This is a hospital. This is about lives that were lost because something somewhere went wrong. And those families deserve to know exactly what went wrong. But more importantly, who is responsible for it. Because anything less should not and will not be tolerated by any of us. Look, someone that I know was affected by this got in touch with me anonymously yesterday. They were treated at the hospital as a patient and has since developed numerous infections, still requiring ongoing treatment. They told me, and I'm quoting this lady, "I'm living with PTSD following my mistreatment of care. I do not know what the future holds for me and whether the treatment I'm getting by specialists will be successful. But what I do not believe is that there has been any cultural change within that health board. They are not transparent and they continue to be evasive." And I'm quoting this not to point necessarily fingers at individuals in the current board, NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde, but it really hammers home that point that the whole central issue of trust is at the heart of this whole ordeal, because that constituent of mine does not trust the health board to do the right thing, and she is not alone. But we must start by addressing the most important issue today, patient safety. The Scottish Government must promptly and publicly confirm the safety of every ward and unit in that hospital right now. I have no doubt that patients there now are being treated for well and carefully by our amazing NHS staff. But ministers must validate that safety in public, explicitly, because it must restore trust in the hospital. And the reason that the NHS, the Safety and Public Confidence Oversight Board, must not be marking its own territory is exactly because of this issue of trust, because years of denial from the board has undermined the trust of the public. The board did not take their concerns seriously, and now for some it is too late. With this in mind, Presiding Officer, we are happy to support the Labour motion today and thank them for bringing it to the Chamber. We will also support the Conservative motion, and I'm afraid to say to the Government we will not support your amendment, because if we want to restore public trust, it starts with accountability and honesty, and that must start here and now in this Chamber.
Thank you. We move to the open debate. I call first Carol Mochan to be followed by Claire Hawkey. Up to 4 minutes. Ms Mochan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Today we are seeking clarity on the safety of the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital. Public trust and confidence in our NHS should always be a top priority. Without it, we risk undermining the very foundations of our health service. I begin my speech today by thanking all the hard-working and dedicated staff who deliver safe and effective care across Scotland each and every day. Staff are the backbone of our NHS, and I'm thankful for all that they do in caring for our families, friends and loved ones. Let us be clear that the issues we discuss today are not an attack on those who deliver care, but rather this debate reflects on failings in governance systems and structures. What happened at the Queen Elizabeth is a scandal, and I would once again like to put on record my deepest condolences and sympathies to the patients, families and staff who were ignored and were betrayed. Hospitals are supposed to help people get better, not make them sicker, and no one should worry that hospitals and healthcare facilities aren't safe. The truth, the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital opened before it was ready, and it opened with contaminated water. The risk of waterborne infection was foreseeable and issues were raised, but they were not acted upon. Those who raised concerns were belittled, silenced and threatened, and whistle-blowing procedures were not followed. The Health Board failed to admit serious errors in judgment and withheld the truth from patients and families. NHS staff deserve to work in an environment where their concerns are listened to and addressed, particularly when patient safety is a concern. But on this Government's watch, this did not happen. What happened at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital was a monumental failure. A failure in safety, a failure in leadership and a failure in accountability. Of course, we cannot rewrite the errors of the past, but we must do everything possible to ensure that patients are kept safe and that past mistakes are never repeated. We must ensure that those affected by the contaminated water are told the truth, and we must ensure that steps are taken to reassure patients of the hospital's safety. The establishment of the Safety and Public Confidence Oversight Group is welcome, of course. It's welcome. Action must be taken to boost the public's confidence in the hospital. However, the establishment of the Oversight Group cannot be another tick-box exercise, and it must lead to tangible and meaningful change for patients, families and staff. While we wait for this group to begin its reporting, which of course could take months, the public needs to be reassured now. We don't need an oversight group to tell us whether every ward and unit in the hospital has been fully validated. The Government could give us this information today. We don't need an oversight group to tell us what immediate steps are being taken to address issues with whistleblowing, which the Patient Safety Commissioner has identified as a system-wide issue. And we don't need an oversight group to tell us how the Scottish Government will ensure full transparency over hospital safety concerns in the future. I recognise the work that the group has been set up to do, but the Government has the power to reassure patients now. The public want to know now, has the hospital been fully validated all areas, water and ventilation in each area? Has this been independently verified, and will this be published? Until these questions are answered and patients and staff are satisfied, Parliament cannot be satisfied. It is our job to speak up for our constituents, to scrutinise this failing Government, and Presiding Officer Anna Sarwar and Scottish Labour are doing just that. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. And I call Claire Hockey to be followed by Paul Sweeney. Up to 4 minutes, Mr Hockey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I remind members of my entry in the Register of Interest, which shows I hold a bank nurse contract with NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde. And I would like to begin today, as I did when I spoke on this subject 2 weeks ago, which is to express my deepest sympathies to all those who are grieving the loss of a loved one in the circumstances which we're discussing today. The Scottish Government took the decision in 2019 to establish a public inquiry to get to the truth, precisely because these families' pain was being compounded by the fact that they were having to tenaciously chase the truth themselves. An independent inquiry with the comprehensive statutory powers granted to it is how we get to the level of open scrutiny and truth that families and patients deserve, and that we all want to see. As a nurse of 30 years' experience, Presiding Officer, I've spoken previously in this chamber about the importance of trust to both patient and family experiences of healthcare, and of course how patient experience and reassurance is related to recovery and patient outcomes. Turning specifically to the Government's amendment today, it agrees that whistleblowers in Scotland's NHS must be protected and supported. It noted that NHS Assure was created in 2021 to improve risk management and safety in Scotland's NHS estate. And it also acknowledges that both Healthcare Improvement Scotland and independent experts have commented on the procedures now in place to ensure the safety of the hospital for patients and staff. And I also welcome the involvement of Sir Lewis Ritchie in the Safety and Public Confidence Oversight Group, which will look at specific issues, including in relation to the built environment and validation. But let's pause for a second to remember that the independent public inquiry, the inquiry I'm confident that will provide the answers, reassurance and recommendations that we're all looking for, is still underway. And while the hospital's inquiry is underway, it would be completely inappropriate for ministers to preempt its findings or final recommendations, or otherwise direct its business. I don't have time, Ms Bailey. And not only would it be completely inappropriate for ministers to seek to do anything other than allow this process to continue, yet again it's being obfuscated by the Labour motion today, and it would be unlawful for them to do so. However, the clue is in the name. Public inquiries, like the one being led by Lord Brodie, are obliged to conduct their work in an open, transparent manner while they are underway. And it's for this reason that we know that Lord Brodie commissioned reports and audits on water and ventilation from Andrew Poplett that have been referenced already, the inquiry's expert. And we know that Mr Poplett's view is that the Queen Elizabeth's current procedures for managing the water system are suitable and safe. And we know that he noted that the facilities team is now exceeding standard guidance and adopting a proactive and preventative approach that prioritises patient safety and resilience. Further, Presiding Officer, we know that expert testimony to the inquiry has advised that governance arrangements for both water and ventilation are now optimal. These are independent judgments that are important markers of the progress that has been made and of the seriousness with which patient safety is now embedded in day-to-day operations in the hospital. Without preempting the inquiry's final conclusions and recommendations, I'm pleased that we have all been able to be provided with important reassurances about the hospital's water and ventilations during its course. And as I finished my speech 2 weeks ago, Presiding Officer, I'll finish by bringing my focus back to the patients and families. I sincerely hope that when the inquiry's final conclusions and recommendations are published, that they're able to finally gain a sense of closure and feel that their questions have been answered.
Thank you. I call Paul Sweeney to be followed by Jackson Carlo. Up to 4 minutes, Mr Sweeney.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And I think it is with some reluctance that we are once again having to raise the concerns about the safety of the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital's ventilation and water systems here in Parliament, because we feel compelled to do so, because that patient safety in NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde is still very much in question today, and we are not satisfied that the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care is sufficiently across the issue. Last time this topic was raised in Parliament, I talked about the culture that needed to change in Scotland, which is a much more wider encompassing issue. How we must end the situation where loyalty and compliance is rewarded over competency and moral courage, and where to be in the club is more important than holding institutions of power to account. And in the short time I have this afternoon, I want to talk about how we can do things differently, how we can build up a culture that identifies good practice, emulates it, manages problems with integrity, and actually starts to change things for the better through a system of moral courage. In the industry I came from, in shipbuilding, where health and safety must be kept at high standards because lives are at stake, there is a clear expectation at all levels in the workforce that everyone in that team has the responsibility to stop the job if they perceive that something unsafe is happening. In every major disaster that we've seen in recent years, from the Boeing 737 MAX to Chernobyl, the same pattern applies, that people feel they are unable to speak out, raise concerns, and as a result, lives are lost. And that is what we have seen play out in the case of the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital as well. It doesn't matter if someone is an apprentice, an engineer or a senior executive. If something is unsafe, they are supposed to call it out and often stop the act of work until the issue is resolved. And that sounds like an easy thing to say here, but in practice it takes a great deal of trust, training and indeed courage for it to operate as it should. For an apprentice to be able to speak out, they must have confidence that their concerns will be listened to, action will be taken, and that blame will be on those who caused the issue or failed to act, not on those who have spotted it and tried to get it resolved. And what we have seen, Deputy Presiding Officer, is those who did have the moral courage have been harangued, cajoled, pressured into silence, and it's their courage that we should be recognising today more than anything else, because they have been the ones who have acted with the public spirit at their heart, and for their work they have undoubtedly helped save lives, but it's all too much of a loss for us to bear that people have died unnecessarily as a result of negligence, and we must hold that to account. Lives are on the line here, and now some might be wondering how this relates to the National Health Service, but I think it's clear that we need to improve our culture of management within the National Health Service. The lives of patients and staff are simply too important Any one of us could be affected by this. Any member of our family could be affected by this. Simply too important to allow for an old-fashioned game of pass the blame to continue. We need staff to feel empowered to raise issues, to stop what's happening, to know that their concerns will be acted on immediately, and accountability will lie with those who held the relevant responsibilities for ensuring safety. And while many will say that this is already in place, I think today's debate shows that we're still not there yet. Today, there are still live risks with the ventilation system in the hospital. The failure to act to validate these critical systems has not been, is simply unacceptable and is not something we can tolerate. It's time for the leadership of this government to stop playing games and to actually work with the National Health Service to improve its health and safety record, stop working towards election deadlines, but instead to do the harder job of guiding our public health system to where it needs to be. None of these changes will help those who have lost loved ones due to the unsafe water and ventilation situation. But if implemented now, we can begin to create a National Health Service where scandals like this do not happen again. And I hope the Chamber will support our motion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Sweeney. And I call Jackson Carlow to be followed by Christine Graham. Up to 4 minutes. Mr.
Presiding Officer, it fell to me, on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives, a happy duty at the time to welcome Jean Freeman to her ministerial responsibilities in this place in 2016. And I note that I reflected then that she brought considerable lifetime experience to government. But I also noted a comment from her mother, who said that Jean had a voice that could sell coal. Well, she may not have had to sell coal in here, but she did command the respect of this chamber through the detailed way and the conscientious way in which she approached the responsibilities that she had, and never more so in the way that she brought her attention to focus on those women who'd suffered from MESH, because it may well have been Humza Yousaf who passed the final bill at the start of this session, but it was Jean Freeman who accepted the case that there was an argument to allow women to be sent to the United States, to Dr. Veronica's, to have mesh removed that they had been told was no longer even present in their system by the health service in this country. And that is a debt of gratitude that I will not forget, and a debt of gratitude that the women and their families will carry for the rest of their lives. I hope that Susan knows that Jean made a difference. She made a difference. Presiding Officer, I'm here to speak about the Oversight Group. Because the Oversight Group really was a suggestion from the Cabinet Secretary in response to a defeat on a motion the previous week from the Labour Party. It wasn't something that they were volunteering to do, it was something that they decided to do in response. And I worry sometimes about how that comes about. Did the Cabinet Secretary go back to his office and say, "What the heck do I do now?" And some civil servants said, "Well, Minister, you could set up an Oversight Group. And that would be quite a nice way to deal with things. It shows you as a man of action. And it also allows you in future, whenever any inquiries are made about this subject, to say, well, we now have an Oversight Group and we need to let the Oversight Group duly respond." And why am I slightly cynical? Well, I return to MESH. Because as a result of the MESH scandal, we set up a patient safety review group. And what was the outcome of that? It was eventually a commissioned report of Professor Alison Britton that made 38 recommendations on how these groups should be structured and conducted in future, because that oversight group on MESH led to the resignation of the very women who'd been invited to participate in it because they had the experience of the issue to do so. And so I want to ask the Cabinet Secretary whether, in fact, every one of Professor Alison Britton's recommendations on how such groups should operate has been embedded into the operational criteria that are being used to establish the working practices of that group. And I should say that we've also written to Professor Sir Lewis Ritchie to draw his attention to Alison Britton's recommendations, fully accepted by this government at the time, told that every future group would incorporate those into their working practices, to ask him to ensure that they absolutely are. Because this is one of the great scandals of our time, the biggest scandal of this Parliament, and if there's going to be a patient oversight group, it's got to be able to operate with the full confidence of everybody who is employed in it, and for us to know that it won't be some sort of chimera of obfuscation, but will actually be a body which is able to ensure that this doesn't happen again and that people know why it did.
Thank you, Mr Carlow. We come to the final speaker in the open debate. Christine Graham, up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. I also pay my respects and tributes to Jean and my condolences to her partner. Deputy Presiding Officer, I am concerned that the attempt by Labour to interfere in the independent inquiry into the Queen Elizabeth is now shifting base, but with the same goal, to undermine confidence in the inquiry and that of patients and staff in the safety of the hospital. Interference, undermining the findings before publication of the report, is Labour's shame. I have here a copy of the letter from Anna Sarwar to Lord Brodie, Inner House Judge, which blatantly breaches the independence of the inquiry process and challenges the very competence of Lord Brodie as chair. Mr Sarwar requests the 5-year-long inquiry be reopened, in particular to interrogate government ministers, despite the fact that Jean Freeman, who established the inquiry, had already given evidence and government ministers stated they would give evidence if requested. That they have not been called is entirely at the judgment of Lord Brodie, who may call whomsoever he wants. And I quote from Mr Sarwar's letter, quote, "I appreciate that reopening public evidence sessions would be an extraordinary step, but I believe that this is the best route for securing the answers that family and staff need and to ensure your report and the public are able to account for this vital component in the scandal." Close quotes. Now, I repeat, to ensure your report and the public are able to account for this vital component. The conclusion must be that Lord Brodie is not up to the job. He has failed to call all relevant witnesses, and failure to do as Anna Sarwar asks will mean the inquiry is flawed and cannot be relied on. This is an act of desperation and political sabotage. Deputy Presiding Officer, in 2007, following 8 years of Labour Liberal Democrat administration, Scotland faced a major crisis regarding hospital-acquired infections. An example was at the Vale of Leven Hospital in Jackie Bailey's constituency. There, C. diff was a contributory factor in 34 deaths. Those failures had occurred during the Labour Liberal Democrat administration. The SNP, new to government, instigated an independent inquiry, published in 2014, which established the hospital environment had not been conducive to safety and cleanliness, with poor antibiotic prescribing practices and inadequate nursing care. Indeed, earlier, a 2007 Health Protection Scotland survey found that 9.5% of patients in acute hospitals in Scotland had a healthcare-associated infection. In the same year, under Nicola Sturgeon's stewardship as Health Secretary, private outsourcing of cleaning and catering contracts in acute hospitals was banned, bringing them back in-house. As a result, hospital-acquired infection was halved from that 9.5% 2005-2006 to 4.9% by 2011 and remains low. Why say this? The SNP track record of responding, but more than that, letting independent inquiries do their work without fear or favour goes back a long way. Regrettably, the same cannot be said of Labour.
Thank you. We move to wind-up speeches. I call first Gillian Mackay. And up to 4 minutes, Ms Mackay.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. At the heart of this debate is patients and families, many of whom will be hurt, traumatised and angry. And that's why it's so important that we get the tone of these debates right, that we air concerns without worsening their trauma, and that we share stories without invading their privacy because they've been through enough. To lose a loved one in the place they're meant to be safe is unimaginable. To then be lied to about what happened to them is disgraceful, and we should make sure it never happens again. As I said in my opening speech, I do welcome the establishment of the Safety and Public Confidence Oversight Group. I'm either less cynical or more hopeful than Jackson Carlaw. While it cannot make up for the suffering inflicted on the patients and families involved, I believe it's a crucial opportunity to restore trust and rebuild relationships. Yes.
Secretary.
Just to save some time in my closing, I can confirm to Gillian Mackay, as per her question in her opening speech, that patients and staff will both be represented on the Oversight Group.
Gillian Mackay.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that. Along with the public inquiry, the Oversight Group will hopefully help to answer any questions patients, families and staff have about the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital. What went wrong, who's responsible, how they'll be held to account and how we move forward. I hope the Scottish Government will fully embrace the opportunity that the Oversight Group gives to make progress while we're waiting for the full outcomes of the inquiry, because we cannot squander this opportunity. Too many people have already been let down and traumatised by the failings at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital. The Oversight Group must be open, transparent and crucially accountable. And that's why it's imperative, as I mentioned earlier, that patient and staff representatives are on the group, and I appreciate the confirmation from the Cabinet Secretary that they will be there. For those staff and patient representatives, I think pastoral support must be offered to them. What some of them will have been through is unimaginable, and it's vital that a trauma-informed approach is taken so that their suffering is not compounded by reliving the events at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital. Despite my reservations about the wording of the motion, I will be voting for the Labour motion at decision time, as I said in my opener. The Scottish Government still has questions to answer about the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, and we would not be doing our jobs as MSPs if we didn't put those questions to the Cabinet Secretary. We must keep asking questions as long as it takes for them to be answered to whoever it is that needs to answer them. We need to get to the bottom of what's happened at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, and that often means robustly challenging Government and NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde. I think we can do that in a way that avoids re-traumatising or potentially scaring people out of treatment. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, it's vital we do not lose sight of the people most affected, the patients, their loved ones and those grieving families. Their pain and their suffering must be at the forefront of our minds at all times.
Thank you, Ms Mackay. And Echo Brown Whittle, up to 4 minutes. Mr Whittle.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I add my condolences to the family and friends of Jean Freeman? I had the opportunity, the daunting opportunity, to sit opposite her during her time as Cabinet Secretary. She was incredibly intelligent. She could be really fierce, but she was always fair, and she was always open to discussion from across the chamber, especially during the dark times of COVID. And my thoughts are with Susan, her family and her colleagues. Presiding Officer, I rise to close on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives. And here we are again. It's the same old story. It's the opposition keeping the spotlight shining on a tragedy in the health service, and a government following the usual pattern of resisting accountability and responsibility before eventually, after pressure from constituents, MSP and the media, falling behind the shield of a public inquiry. And it's not that I'm against a public inquiry, Presiding Officer. I would say it's essential in this case. It's what happens afterwards. Who is accountable and who is responsible, and what is the change that will be enacted following the recommendations? Unfortunately, we've been here before. My colleague and friend Jackson Carlaw raised the spectacle of the mesh scandal, for which I was a member of the Petitions Committee and hearing the evidence from those suffering. And my colleague, as I said, Jackson Carlaw, front and centre, supporting the petitioners, pursuing the government for justice and change, to avoid this ever happening again. Years of ducking and diving, of trying to avoid taking action, and for anyone who actually witnessed the then Cabinet Secretary Shona Robertson and the CMO Catherine Corderwood trying to answer questions from the Public Petition Committee, and with the sufferers sitting behind them, many of them confined to a wheelchair, floundering she was. It was absolutely painful to watch. El Jamel, first red flag raised by a concerned staff in 2009. An inquiry started 2025 after again relentlessly being pursued in support of affected constituents by my friend and colleague Liz Smith. And let's not forget the words of the Patient Safety Commissioner to the Health and Sport Committee last week when I asked the question, could an El Jamel ever happen again? Chillingly, she said she had no confidence in that. Think on that. A catastrophe in 2009 and a Scottish Government and NHS governments have not learned the lessons needed to avoid that tragedy once again. And my constituent Fraser Morton and his partner June, whose son Lucas would have been 10 years old this year had it not been for the failings of a neonatal unit where he died in childbirth. I was there through the meetings with NHS Ayrshire and Arran Health Board, the meetings with the Cabinet Secretary Shona Robertson and the CMO Catherine Calderwood when they tried to talk him down. The eventual investigation by HIS following a TV documentary on the situation, discovering there were 24 neonatal staff shot, along with a high mortality rate at the time. Thank goodness he never took the compensation offer to go away. Consider this, Presiding Officer. Where would we be if we didn't have a Liz Smith or a Jackson Carlow and others from across this chamber putting their shoulders to the wheel to support constituents and victims? Where would we be if Fraser Morton had not been as relentless as he was and gave up and took the compensation? Campaigners resisting platitudes from ministers and managers alike, demanding the changes that are so needed. One of the biggest barriers to accountability or changing the culture across the NHS is just how fragmented our healthcare system is. We have 14 regional boards, we have 7 special health boards, or 9 if you include Public Health Scotland and the Mental Welfare Commission, 30 integrated joint boards, 31 health and social care partnerships, 32 local authorities, all involved to some degree in the delivery of healthcare. Presiding Officer, until the Scottish Government do what is necessary to end the culture of defensiveness in the face of mistakes, the culture of saying close ranks and protect the system even when the system is wrong, the culture that means those who speak out are ostracised rather than heard, the NHS will never be the health service we want it to be. So I ask the question again, who is responsible? Who is accountable? Presiding Officer.
Thank you. I now call the Cabinet Secretary up to 5 minutes.
Presiding Officer, I'd like to thank members for all their contributions to this debate. We have a collective interest, I hope, in strengthening public confidence in the Queen Elizabeth. Families seeking answers from the public inquiry deserve to hear its findings in the knowledge that it has been allowed to carry on independently and without fear of any political interference, a point raised by Christine Graham. Patients in the hospital now and in the future want to be reassured, like any other NHS service, that their care will be safe. NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde is responsible for all operations at the Queen Elizabeth and are taking significant steps to maintain public confidence and assure the safety of the hospital. That responsibility, of course, requires oversight and scrutiny, and I'm confident that Sir Lewis Ritchie will not shirk in providing independent challenge where that is needed. I don't think anyone could suggest that Sir Lewis is the tick-box type person to ease Carol Mochan's concerns. Presiding Officer, further to my opening remarks on the current safety of the water and ventilation system, I can confirm that the Board has commissioned and received 2 independent reports on their water and ventilation systems to provide further assurances. These will be considered by the Safety and Public Confidence Oversight Group, in addition to proactive planned maintenance of the hospital systems, which is carried out routinely, and in addition to reactive reporting and escalation, which is carried out as and when required to ensure clinical safety of the hospital. The findings of the independent reports on the water and ventilation systems have been positive, with a fully compliant ventilation assessment in December and a fully compliant water system assessment in January this year. Ventilation governance has been subject to equally rigorous scrutiny. In March this year, Healthcare Improvement Scotland was Healthcare Improvement Scotland was asked to review progress in Glasgow addressing requirements arising from its June 2022 inspection. Healthcare Improvement Scotland reported that the original inspection covered, I quote, more elements of the healthcare associated infection standards than had been covered in any other single inspection, underlining the depth of that assessment. His further confirmed that the subsequent action plan showed all 4 requirements had been completed. This evidence assures me that the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital is safe. Finally, on validation, which I did not have time to get to in my opening remarks, but I wish to address now. I heard Gillian Mackay's speech, so I hope that she will also hear this when we speak of public confidence, which I believe Labour's motion seeks to undermine. I fully understand why members have raised concerns about whether a full and complete validation was carried out, but I'd want to convey to members that assurance of safety is not just based on one single metric. Through the findings of the various independent experts I have cited and the ongoing work of Greater Glasgow and Clyde, the evidence all points to the safety of the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital. So let me provide specific detail. We know that the inquiry, if I've got time when I conclude this point, I will try to come back to Mr Sarwar. We know that the inquiry has heard evidence around the air systems and standards set when the hospital first opened. It is for the inquiry to come to its own conclusions or recommendations around the hospital's first opening. I will not prejudge that. However, the Government has been assured by NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde that those systems have since had further works done or have a multidisciplinary derogation in place. All critical air systems are subject to a full annual validation process carried out by authorised persons and by NHS Greater and Glasgow and Clyde's authorising engineer. All systems are subject to regular maintenance checks in line with guidance recommendations. NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde has implemented clear governance structures, regular audits and a quality improvement strategy aligned to national standards. Any issues that require escalation are escalated to management and board committees. This structured approach ensures that prompt attention and remediation and, if necessary, notification to government. Escalation to the government has not been considered necessary in respect of the general wards. All of this matters because of the safety must be driven by evidence and expertise. This is a principle of fundamental importance which I urge all members to recognise. Have I time?
I can give you a little bit of time back.
Mr. Sarwar.
Briefly, Anna Sarwar.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that, for taking the intervention. With public confidence in mind, he refers to reports on the water and the ventilation. Will he publish those reports, and will he ensure those reports are shared with Dr Inkster and Dr Peters so that they are satisfied, and therefore that also gives public reassurance, given that everything they've said in the last 10 years has proven to be true and they've been bullied on?
Cabinet Secretary.
All of these issues will be considered by the Public Confidence and Oversight Group, of which I believe anyone, all patients and staff have a representative on that group. And I believe that there has been approaches made to the doctors that Mr Sarwar references to ensure that their confidence in the processes that have been put in place since the opening of the hospital can be confirmed. To conclude, Presiding Officer, members will be aware that I have written to party spokespeople and the Health and Social Care and Sport Committee to offer an opportunity to meet with me and the co-chairs of the new Safety and Public Confidence Oversight Group. I am very open to any further suggestions that members have on providing additional assurances beyond what I have set out today. As I said at the outset of my speech, we must ensure that patients, families and staff at the heart of the issues that we are discussing get the truth that they deserve through Lord Brodie's inquiry. It's for these reasons I again ask all members to support the Government's amendment.
Thank you. I now call on Jackie Baillie to wind up the debate. Up to 6 minutes, Ms Baillie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The events at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital resulted in the death of patients, both adults and children. It is one of the worst scandals in the history of this Parliament, on a par with the tragedy that occurred at the Vale of Leven Hospital, and the loss of life was entirely preventable. I am so disappointed in Christine Graham's shameless and factually inaccurate speech, and I will take this up with her later. It was to the credit of Jean Freeman that she established the Scottish Hospitals Inquiry after hearing about the concerns. And I also want to offer my condolences to Susan and to her family and colleagues. That inquiry has spent the last 5 years trying to undo the culture of secrecy and uncover exactly what led to these patients dying. An inquiry's job is to make sense of the past so that we can learn lessons for the future. And back in 2015, I asked then Health Secretary Shona Robson whether she would learn the lessons of the Vale of Leven Hospital inquiry and carry out an independent audit into the new hospital. She agreed, and then she changed her mind and claimed that there was no need to follow the Maclean report's recommendations because there was robust monitoring and reporting in place. Had there been an independent audit, it just might have saved lives. The hospital opened too soon, when it was not safe to do so, and in the first 3 years of the hospital's operation, the Scottish Government was alerted to at least 14 serious infection outbreaks. Each of these reports would have landed on Shona Robinson's desk. So what was the result of this robust monitoring and reporting? Did the reports get read or acted on? Or is this another example of complacency that resulted in patients dying? It is little wonder, I don't have time, it is little wonder then that the assurances from the Scottish Government ring hollow. The lack of transparency, the toxic culture of secrecy, unsurprisingly mean that very few trust the Scottish Government or the Health Board. Both have spent the last 10 years gaslighting whistleblowers, dismissing the concerns of families and covering up the truth from the people of Scotland. The staff at the hospital are superb, and let me tell you why I know this. Last week I visited the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, and I saw with my own eyes the challenges that remain. And yes, the staff at the hospital do a tremendous job. They are second to none. This is not their fault, but this is a problem with the building. Patients now are supplied with bottled water. There are filters on the taps because the water is not safe. Too many people in the room when the ventilation is inadequate, and air changes are half what they actually should be. The atrium, when you arrive, is filled floor to ceiling with masses upon masses of steel scaffolding. Yellow buckets to catch water coming in from the ceiling in some ward areas. And it appears that the hospital is being rebuilt from the inside out, and it's only just over 10 years old. But the key question that the government need to answer for patients' reassurance and for the staff is whether the hospital is safe today. The Cabinet Secretary, Neil Gray, was unable to give that absolute reassurance when we last debated the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, and he can't actually, with confidence, answer it today. Because we need the evidence. No, you didn't take one from me, so let me finish the point. Let me finish the point. We need evidence to reassure staff and patients that the water system is safe and that the ventilation system is safe. He should publish the reports in his possession, because it took cross-party support across the Parliament to shake the government out of complacency, and I am grateful to the Greens and all opposition parties for coming together again today. The Council to the Inquiry noted that validation had only been carried out in selected wards. The Poplet report, which the government has relied on, covered both ventilation and water, but it was restricted in scope. In fairness, Mr Poplet did what he was asked to do. This was a desktop exercise covering limited wards, not the whole hospital. It relied on paperwork provided by the Health Board. It failed to consider the logs of issues and associated clinical risk because that information wasn't provided. And the whistleblowers, who are the infection control experts, were not involved. This was a report on management of the system, not the original design of the system. And in fact, Mr Poplet himself said that the water was the minimum required by the Scottish Health Technical Memorandum Standards. And he noted that given the clinical activity and patient groups involved, I would have anticipated a greater degree of testing. The Council to the Inquiry went on to say, and I quote, that the whole hospital ventilation system has not been validated. The general wards have not been validated. It's most concerning that this has not been done. The inquiry says, don't wait for the conclusion of their report. Patient safety demands changes now. And his own contribution to the inquiry, Neil Gray told them that he would be surprised if the ventilation system of the hospital was not validated against any standard before opening. But it wasn't, was it? Is he surprised that Shona Robson did not seek that assurance? Is he surprised now that the ventilation system has still not been validated? I have to say, I am surprised at this astonishing level of complacency. Presiding Officer, there are so many questions that the public deserve answers to. Unfortunately, the Scottish Government cannot actually confirm whether the hospital is safe today. So I say to them, reassure patients by providing plans for protecting at-risk patients right now. Validate the ventilation and the water throughout the hospital, and make sure that the validation reports are shared with whistleblowers and are published. Families and whistleblowers deserve nothing less.
Thank you, Ms Bailey. That concludes the debate on the safety of the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital. There will be a brief pause before we move to the next item of business.